The silk sheets felt like a lie against my skin. I bolted upright, heart hammering, staring at walls I'd never seen before. Floor-to-ceiling windows. City lights bleeding through expensive curtains. The scent of cedar and something dangerously masculine clinging to everything around me. This wasn't my cramped studio apartment. This wasn't my threadbare comforter or my son's superhero posters on the wall. Where the hell was I? My clothes, my cheap black dress from last night's company gala, were folded neatly on a chair like someone had taken care to smooth every wrinkle. My heels placed perfectly beneath. A glass of water and 2 aspirin sat on the nightstand next to a note written in sharp, precise handwriting. You were safe. D. Damian Harrison. My billionaire boss. Oh God. Oh no. No, no. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Before we dive into what happened next, and trust me, you're not ready for this, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are you team figure it out fast, or team run and never look back? And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button because stories like this one, they're going to mess with your head in the best way possible. The bedroom door opened like a whisper, and there he stood. Damian Harrison. 6'3" of controlled power in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent. His dark hair was already perfect despite the early hour, his jaw set in that familiar line that made every woman in the office forget how to breathe. Those steel gray eyes that missed nothing, the ones that had watched me from across boardrooms for months like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, locked onto mine. But this morning, something was different. This morning, they looked haunted. You're awake. His voice was rougher than usual, like he'd been up all night. I scrambled to pull the blanket higher, trying to piece together fragments of memory that felt like smoke. The gala. Extra hours cleaning up. Rain pounding the windows. Everything after that was nothing. Mr. Harrison, I don't understand. How did I get dressed? He cut me off, turning away like he couldn't stand to look at me. Security will escort you out. The words hit like ice water. Escort me out? He moved to his desk, picking up a manila envelope with mechanical precision. No emotion. No explanation. Just that terrifying calm that made him the most feared man in the corporate world. Your employment with Harrison and Company is terminated, effective immediately. The room spun. What? Severance pay is included. Your personal items will be sent to your address. His voice was arctic. Professional. Like I was just another business transaction to close. I stumbled to my feet, still clutching the blanket. I don't understand. What happened? What did I do? For just a moment, one heartbeat, his mask slipped. Something raw flickered across his face. Pain. Regret. But it vanished so fast I might have imagined it. Nothing. The word came out strangled. You did nothing wrong. Then why? Because I can't. He stopped himself, jaw clenching. When he looked at me again, his eyes were empty glass. Because you're fired, Miss Bennett. That's all you need to know. Miss Bennett. Not Alyssa. Not the woman who'd saved his mother's life 3 months ago. Just another employee he was discarding. The walls of his perfect penthouse suddenly felt like they were crushing me. Everything I'd worked for, the job that was supposed to save me, the steady income that kept my son safe, the chance to finally build something stable after my ex-husband destroyed everything, crumbling in a single sentence. I have a child. The words tore out of me. I have a 7-year-old son who needs. That's not my concern. But his hands trembled as he said it. Just barely. Just enough to make me wonder if the man who'd just destroyed my life was destroying something in himself, too. I wanted to scream. To demand answers. To beg. Instead, I grabbed my clothes with whatever dignity I had left and locked myself in his marble bathroom. My reflection stared back, mascara smudged, hair tangled, eyes wild with confusion and terror. What happened last night? Why couldn't I remember? And why did the man who just fired me look like he was breaking apart as much as I was? 20 minutes later, I stood in the lobby of Harrison and Company for what would be the last time, clutching that manila envelope like a lifeline. Employees stared as security flanked me to the door. The whispers started immediately. Sleeping with the boss. Finally got caught. Always knew she was that type. But they didn't know the truth. Hell, neither did I. As the elevator doors closed on everything I'd fought to build, one question burned through my mind like acid. What really happened in that room last night, and why was Damian Harrison willing to destroy us both to hide it? 6 months earlier, I'd been a different person entirely. Mrs. Alyssa Bennett, married to a successful lawyer, living in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, planning my son Jamie's birthday parties and believing that love could survive anything. Even discovering that your husband of 8 years has been funneling your joint savings into offshore accounts while sleeping with his paralegal. Even learning that the man you trusted with your heart had been systematically destroying your credit, your reputation, and your future. The divorce papers had been the kindest thing Michael ever gave me. But losing the house, the car, and every penny we'd saved? That was just the beginning. Michael Collins knew exactly how to work the legal system. After all, he'd built his career on it. By the time the dust settled, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like mildew and broken dreams, working 3 part-time jobs just to keep the lights on. And fighting the battle that mattered most. "Mommy, why can't I have my Spider-Man sheets anymore?" Jamie had asked one night, curled up on our air mattress in what used to be his bedroom but was now our shared living space. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his father, the man who taught him to ride a bike and read bedtime stories, was trying to take him away? That every missed payment, every late notice, every desperate choice I made was ammunition in Michael's custody case? "We're on an adventure, remember?" I'd whispered, smoothing his dark hair. Like camping, but inside. His smile had been brave and trusting, and it shattered something in my chest. Jamie deserved so much better than a mother who could barely keep food on the table. That's when Harrison and Company happened. I'd applied for hundreds of jobs, marketing, administration, anything that matched my business degree. But a felony-level debt record and a vindictive ex-husband who'd made calls to his lawyer friends meant doors slammed shut before I could even speak. The janitorial position at Harrison and Company wasn't glamorous. Night shifts. Minimum wage. Cleaning offices for people who wouldn't look twice at me. But it was honest work, and honest work was all I had left. Maria Santos, the head of building maintenance, had been the first person in months to look at me like I was human. "You're overqualified," she'd said, scanning my resume with kind brown eyes. "College degree, marketing experience, why do you want to clean offices?" "Because I need this job." I'd met her gaze directly. "And because I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired." Something in my voice must have convinced her, because she hired me on the spot. Those first weeks were brutal. 10-hour shifts scrubbing bathrooms and vacuuming boardrooms while Jamie stayed with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who watched him for $20 a night, money I couldn't afford but couldn't survive without. I learned the rhythm of Harrison and Company after hours. Which executives stayed late. Which floors were always empty by 7. How to become invisible while still doing work that mattered. And slowly, carefully, I started to notice things. The empire Damian Harrison had built wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. Clean energy technology that was changing the world. Charitable foundations that helped families like mine. A company culture that, at least on paper, valued innovation over politics. But the man himself remained a mystery. Damian Harrison was 34, worth $8 billion, and notoriously private. No social media presence. No tabloid scandals. No public relationships. Just power and precision and an intensity that made grown executives stutter during presentations. I'd see him sometimes, working late in his corner office. Always alone. Always focused. There was something almost lonely about watching him through the glass walls, this brilliant, powerful man surrounded by everything money could buy and no one to share it with. Not that it was my business. I was there to work, not fantasize about billionaires. But then came the morning that changed everything. I was restocking supplies in the lobby when I heard the commotion. Voices raised in panic. Someone shouting for an ambulance. An elderly woman in an elegant cream coat had collapsed near the elevators, her designer purse spilled across the marble floor. Employees stood in a useless circle, paralyzed by corporate liability fears and the sight of someone clearly in distress. I didn't think. I just moved. My CPR certification from Jamie's school volunteer program kicked in as I knelt beside her, checking her pulse and breathing. She was conscious but struggling, her lips tinged blue. "Call 911, I ordered the nearest suit, my voice cutting through the chaos. Tell them possible heart attack, conscious patient, difficulty breathing." As I positioned her head and checked her airways, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "My son?" she whispered. "He's coming," I said softly, though I had no idea who her son was. "Just breathe with me, okay? In and out. You're going to be fine." The paramedics arrived as I was helping her sit up slowly, color returning to her cheeks. Only then did I notice the crowd that had gathered, and the man pushing through them like a force of nature. Damian Harrison's face was white as death, his usual composure completely shattered. He dropped to his knees beside us, taking the woman's hand with a gentleness I'd never seen from him. "Mom?" His mother. "Of course. I'm all right, darling," she said, squeezing his fingers. This lovely young woman took excellent care of me. For the first time since I'd started working at Harrison and Company, Damian Harrison looked directly at me. Really looked at me. Like he was seeing me instead of looking through me. "Thank you." The words came out rough, loaded with emotion he was trying to control. I nodded, standing up and brushing off my uniform. Anyone would have done the same. But his eyes followed me as I gathered my supplies and disappeared back into invisibility, and something had shifted in the careful distance between us. 3 months later, I was still cleaning his office every night, and he was still working late. But now there were moments, fleeting, dangerous moments, where I'd catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Like I mattered. And maybe that should have been my first warning that everything was about to fall apart. 3 weeks after saving his mother's life, Damian Harrison spoke to me for the second time. I was restocking the supply closet on the executive floor when his office door opened with that soft pneumatic hiss that somehow commanded attention throughout the entire building. Miss Bennett. My hand stilled on the stack of printer paper I was arranging. In the 3 months I'd worked at Harrison and Company, hearing my name from his lips had never stopped feeling surreal. Mr. Harrison. I turned, keeping my voice professional despite the way my pulse quickened whenever he looked at me with those penetrating gray eyes. My mother has been asking about you. He stepped closer, close enough that I caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She'd like to send a proper thank you. That's not necessary. I was just in the right place at the right time, with the right training, making the right choices under pressure. His voice was matter of fact, but there was something else underneath it. Something that made my skin warm. Most people freeze in moments like that. Most people haven't spent 2 years volunteering in their kid's school nurse office because they couldn't afford after-school care. The words slipped out before I could stop them, too honest and too personal. His expression shifted, a micro-expression that could have been surprise or something deeper. You have a son. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Jamie. He's 7. And his father? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I met his gaze directly, lifting my chin with whatever pride I had left. His father thinks custody hearings are more important than bedtime stories. Something dark flickered across Damian's face. For a moment, the billionaire mask slipped, and I saw something raw and angry underneath. I see. But before I could analyze what that meant, his phone buzzed with the kind of urgent tone reserved for board members and international crises. The moment shattered, and he was back to being the untouchable CEO who ran a global empire. Excuse me, he said, but his eyes lingered on mine for one heartbeat longer than necessary. That night, I found an envelope on my supply cart with my name written in elegant script. Inside was a gift card to the grocery store where I shopped, $500, enough to cover Jamie's meals for 2 months. There was no note, but I knew who it was from. The next morning, I tried to return it to his assistant, but Patricia Kingsley, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who guarded Damian's schedule like classified information, just smiled knowingly. Mr. Harrison doesn't accept returns on personal gifts, she said. I'd suggest using it for whatever you need most. What I needed most was for my billionaire boss to stop noticing me, because nothing good could come from Damian Harrison paying attention to the woman who cleaned his office. But the damage was already done. Over the following weeks, our interactions became a dangerous dance of professional courtesy layered with something neither of us could name. He'd nod when he passed me in the halls. I'd leave his coffee exactly how he liked it, black, no sugar, still steaming, when I cleaned his office. Sometimes I'd find small things that made my life easier, a better vacuum cleaner assigned to my cart, premium cleaning supplies that worked twice as fast, a schedule adjustment that let me finish an hour earlier. Never anything obvious. Never anything that could be traced back to him. But I knew. And maybe that's why I didn't see Victoria Ashford coming. So you're the one. I looked up from wiping down the conference room table to find a stunning blonde woman watching me with calculating blue eyes. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege, from her designer suit to the way she held herself like she owned whatever space she occupied. I'm sorry? The cleaning girl who's been making eyes at my fiancé. The words hit like ice water. Fiancé. Damian was engaged. Of course he was. Men like Damian Harrison didn't stay single, they married other billionaires' daughters and had perfect, strategic relationships that looked good in business magazines. I think you have me confused with someone else, I managed, continuing to clean even as my hands shook slightly. Victoria laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. Oh, honey. I've been watching you for weeks. The way you look at him. The way he's been distracted lately. She moved closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Did you really think no one would notice? I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Her smile was razor sharp. Let me be clear, since you're obviously out of your depth. Damian and I have been together for 3 years. We're announcing our engagement at next month's charity gala. Whatever little fantasy you've been entertaining about the handsome billionaire noticing the poor single mother, it ends now." The cruel accuracy of her words cut deeper than I expected. Because she was right, I had been entertaining fantasies. Stupid, impossible daydreams about a man so far out of my league he might as well have been on another planet. "I understand," I said quietly. "Do you?" Victoria stepped even closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Because if I see you anywhere near him that doesn't involve a mop and bucket, I'll make sure your little boy learns what happens when his mommy reaches above her station." Custody battles can get so messy, especially when one parent has questionable employment situations. The threat was clear, and it worked. Because everything I'd fought for, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every shred of dignity I'd traded for stability, was for Jamie. Victoria Ashford could destroy my son's future with a few well-placed phone calls to the right people. "We understand each other, then." Victoria's smile returned to socialite perfection. "Wonderful. I do so hate workplace drama." She swept out of the conference room like a queen leaving her court, and I collapsed into the nearest chair with legs that suddenly couldn't support me. Engaged. Damian Harrison was engaged to a woman who could buy and sell me without breaking her perfect manicure. Whatever I'd thought was happening between us, those looks, those small kindnesses, that moment of connection, had been pure wishful thinking. But as I sat there in that empty conference room, trying to convince myself that Victoria was right and I was just another employee with delusions of grandeur, one thought kept nagging at me. If Damian Harrison was so happy with his perfect fiancée, why did he always look so lonely when he thought no one was watching? And why, despite every logical reason to stay away from him, did I find myself hoping I'd figure out the answer? 3 weeks later, the invitation appeared on every employee's desk: the annual Harrison and Company Charity Gala, black tie optional, all staff welcome to attend. At the bottom, in Patricia's familiar handwriting, was a note: additional volunteers needed for event coordination. Extra pay available. I stared at that invitation for a long time, knowing I should throw it away and pretend the gala didn't exist. Instead, I signed up to volunteer. Because sometimes the worst decisions feel like the only ones you can make. The weeks leading up to the gala became a masterclass in emotional warfare. Victoria Ashford made sure I understood exactly where I stood in the Harrison and Company hierarchy. She'd appear in the break room when I was eating my sad desk lunch, talking loudly about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations. She'd schedule impromptu meetings in conference rooms right as I was cleaning them, forcing me to work around her and her circle of equally polished friends. But the worst part wasn't Victoria's psychological games, it was the way Damian seemed to retreat further into himself after our conversation about Jamie. Where before he'd nod when our paths crossed, now he looked through me like I was part of the furniture. Where before I'd find small considerations that made my job easier, now there was nothing but professional indifference. I told myself it was better this way. Safer. Victoria had been right about one thing: I couldn't afford to lose this job, and I definitely couldn't afford to give Michael ammunition in his custody case. Speaking of which, Alyssa. The voice on my phone was crisp, professional, and filled with barely contained triumph. David Stewart, Michael's new lawyer, had a talent for making even simple sentences sound like threats. "What do you want, David?" "My client has some concerns about Jamie's living situation. We'd like to schedule a home visit." I gripped the phone tighter, standing in the supply closet where I ducked to take the call. "We're not due for another visit until next month. Circumstances change. We've received some interesting information about your current employment situation." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of information?" "The kind that suggests you might not be providing the most stable environment for a growing boy. We'll see you Tuesday at 6 p.m. Don't be late." The line went dead, and I leaned against the metal shelving, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. How had they found out about Harrison and Company? More importantly, what had they found out? Everything all right? I spun around to find Damian standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How long had he been there? "Fine," I said quickly, shoving my phone into my pocket. "Just family stuff." Something flickered across his face. The custody situation? The question caught me off guard. I'd mentioned it once, weeks ago, and assumed he'd forgotten. Men like Damian Harrison didn't file away personal details about their janitorial staff. "It's handled," I lied. "Is it?" The way he looked at me, really looked at me, made my defenses crumble. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything. About Michael's legal games. About the home visits and the constant threat of losing Jamie. About how I lay awake every night wondering if I was strong enough to keep fighting. But then I remembered Victoria's perfectly manicured threat, and the moment passed. "Yes," I said firmly. "It is." He studied me for another heartbeat, then nodded slowly. If you need anything. I don't. Alyssa. My name on his lips sounded different somehow. Softer. More personal than it had any right to be. You saved my mother's life. That means something to me. If you're in trouble? I'm not in trouble, Mr. Harrison. I'm just trying to do my job. The formal title created the distance I needed, and I watched him retreat behind his professional mask. But as I pushed past him to leave the supply closet, his hand caught my arm, gentle but firm. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're a good mother. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The words hit me like a physical blow, because they were exactly what I needed to hear and exactly what I couldn't afford to believe coming from him. I pulled away and walked back to work, but his touch lingered on my skin like a promise I couldn't keep. That night, I found an envelope tucked under my apartment door. Inside was a business card for Margaret Wood, no relation to my ex-husband, one of the city's top family law attorneys. There was no note, but the message was clear. The next morning, I tried to return the card through Patricia, but she just gave me that knowing smile again. Mr. Harrison doesn't accept returns on gifts, remember? This isn't a gift. It's help, Patricia said simply. And there's no shame in accepting help when you need it. But there was shame in accepting help from a man who was engaged to someone else. A man who could destroy my life with a phone call if he ever decided I was more trouble than I was worth. I kept the card anyway. The gala preparations intensified over the next 2 weeks, and my volunteer duties meant spending more time on the executive floors. More opportunities to cross paths with Damien. More chances for Victoria to remind me of my place. Still here, I see, she said one afternoon, finding me arranging flowers in the lobby. How persistent. I'm working, I replied without looking up. Of course you are. Though I have to wonder about your methods. She picked up one of the white roses, examining it like she'd found something distasteful. Following Damien around, inserting yourself into his family drama, playing the tragic single mother card. I saved his mother's life. I didn't insert myself into anything. Did you? Victoria's smile was poisonous. Or did you see an opportunity and take it? A wealthy older woman collapses right in front of the building maintenance girl with convenient medical training? How fortunate. The implication hit me like a slap. You think I think desperate people do desperate things. And you, darling, absolutely reek of desperation. Before I could respond, she swept away, leaving me standing among the scattered flower petals with my hands shaking from fury. But Victoria's psychological warfare was nothing compared to what Michael had planned. The home visit that Tuesday was a nightmare from start to finish. David Stewart arrived with a social worker and a tablet full of leading questions designed to paint me as an unfit mother. They examined every corner of our tiny apartment, made notes about the air mattress, questioned Jamie about his meals and his bedtimes and whether mommy ever seemed sad or angry. Your employment situation has been inconsistent, David noted, scrolling through his tablet. Multiple part-time jobs, late rent payments, and now you're working as a janitor for a major corporation. That must be quite a step down from your previous aspirations. Honest work isn't a step down from anything. Of course not. Though I understand you've been working closely with the company's CEO lately. That's quite an elevation for someone in building maintenance. The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound innocent while implying something tawdry. I could see the social worker making notes. I clean his office. Like I clean everyone else's office. Naturally. Though there have been some interesting rumors about after-hours activities. My blood pressure spiked. What rumors? Nothing concrete, of course. Just workplace gossip. But you understand how these things can affect a custody arrangement. Judges prefer stable, scandal-free environments for children. They left after an hour of barely veiled threats and carefully documented observations, but the damage was done. Jamie spent the rest of the evening asking why the mean man wanted to know if I had boyfriends and whether he was in trouble. You're not in trouble, baby, I assured him, holding him close on our air mattress. Mommy's just working some things out. But as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, I knew the walls were closing in. Michael's legal team was building a case, Victoria was escalating her psychological warfare, and I was caught in the middle, trying to hold on to a job I couldn't afford to lose while staying away from a man I couldn't afford to want. The gala was in 3 days. And somehow, I had the feeling that everything was about to change. On Friday morning, I found a different kind of envelope waiting for me. Official. Legal. The kind that made my hands shake before I even opened it. Motion for emergency custody modification. Michael was making his move. Next week, I'd be standing in front of a judge fighting for my son's future with a legal team that made Victoria Ashford look subtle. I was still staring at the papers when Patricia appeared beside my cart. Everything all right, dear? I looked up at her kind face, and for a moment, I almost broke down. Almost told her everything. But Patricia worked for Damien, and Damien was engaged to a woman who'd already made her position clear. Fine, I managed. Just paperwork. Patricia's expression suggested she didn't believe me for a second, but she just nodded. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. And Alyssa? Sometimes the most unexpected help comes from the most unexpected places. As she walked away, I wondered if that was supposed to mean something specific. I was about to find out. The Harrison and Company charity gala was everything you'd expect from a billionaire's party, and everything I'd never experienced in my life. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors that probably cost more than most people's houses. Women in designer gowns that could fund Jamie's college education glided past ice sculptures and champagne fountains. The kind of wealth that moved through the world like it owned it. Which, let's be honest, it probably did. I spent the evening invisible in my volunteer uniform, orchestrating the behind-the-scenes magic that made events like this look effortless. Coordinating catering staff, managing coat check, ensuring the charity auction ran smoothly while the city's elite bid obscene amounts on vacation packages and art pieces. From my position near the service entrance, I had the perfect view of Damien Harrison in his element. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo, all sharp lines and controlled power as he worked the room with the kind of effortless charm that probably came from growing up in this world. But even from across the ballroom, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Especially when Victoria appeared at his side in a gold gown that probably cost more than my annual salary. They looked perfect together. Like they'd stepped off the pages of a society magazine. The billionaire tech mogul and his stunning socialite fiancée, ready to announce their engagement to the world. I told myself the twist in my stomach was just hunger. I'd been working for 6 hours straight on nothing but coffee and determination. Quite the production, isn't it? I turned to find Eleanor Harrison, Damien's mother, watching the festivities with an amused expression. At 72, she was still elegant and sharp-eyed, though I could see the slight frailty that had led to her collapse 3 months ago. Mrs. Harrison. I straightened, suddenly conscious of my simple black uniform among all the evening wear. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to a certain young woman who knew what to do when it mattered. Her smile was warm and genuine. You're Alyssa Bennett, aren't you? Damien's told me quite a bit about you. That caught me off guard. He has? Oh yes. He mentioned you work very hard, that you have a young son, and that you're... She paused thoughtfully, remarkably resilient. Before I could process what that might mean, Victoria's laugh carried across the ballroom, bright and artificial as the diamonds around her neck. Eleanor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She's lovely, isn't she? The question felt loaded, but I just nodded politely. They make a beautiful couple. Beautiful, yes. Eleanor's tone was carefully neutral. Though I've always believed the most important thing in a partnership is whether two people bring out the best in each other. She glanced meaningfully toward where Victoria was holding court with a group of society wives, gesturing dramatically about something that seemed to require a lot of hair tossing and strategic touching of her jewelry. Anyway, Eleanor continued, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. And to tell you that if you ever need anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. The kindness in her voice almost broke me. After weeks of Victoria's psychological warfare and Michael's legal threats, having someone, especially Damien's mother, treat me like I mattered was overwhelming. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Harrison. It's not kindness, dear. It's gratitude. She patted my arm gently. Good people are rare in this world. When you find them, you take care of them. As she walked away, I wondered if she was trying to tell me something specific, or if I was reading too much into everything because I was tired and stressed and hanging on to my sanity by a thread. The evening progressed smoothly until around 11 p.m., when the crowd began to thin and the cleanup began in earnest. Most of the volunteers had left, but I'd stayed to help break down the auction displays and coordinate the catering cleanup, partly for the extra pay, mostly because going home meant facing the custody papers that were sitting on my kitchen table like a ticking bomb. I was in the service corridor behind the ballroom, wrestling with a particularly stubborn floral arrangement, when I heard voices approaching. Sharp, angry voices that made me freeze. Don't care what your mother thinks, Victoria was saying, her cultured accent cracking with fury. This is ridiculous, Damien. Keep your voice down. His tone was ice cold. People will hear you. Let them. Maybe it's time people knew the truth about your little charity cases. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping they'd pass by without noticing me. The last thing I needed was to get caught eavesdropping on their private argument. My charity cases? Oh please. The sob story about your mother's collapse, the grateful cleaning lady with the tragic divorce, you've been playing white knight for months. Victoria, you're drunk. We'll discuss this tomorrow. I'm not drunk, I'm tired. Tired of pretending this engagement means something to you when you spend more time thinking about the hired help than your own fiancé. The venom in her voice was shocking. This wasn't the polished socialite I'd seen all evening, this was something raw and ugly underneath. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Then explain why you've been having her investigated. My blood turned to ice. Investigated? What are you talking about? Damien's voice was dangerously quiet. Richard Gray told me everything. Your little pet project with the custody battle, the lawyers, the background checks. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Richard Gray. I knew that name, he was on Harrison and Company's board of directors. A man with political connections and the kind of influence that could destroy lives with a phone call. Richard talks too much. Richard's trying to protect you from making a massive mistake. Do you have any idea what kind of scandal this could create? The optics alone. The optics of what, exactly? A billionaire CEO involving himself in a messy custody battle, throwing money and legal resources at his employees' problems. How do you think that looks, Damien? What do you think people will assume about your relationship with her? There was a long pause, and when Damien spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. My relationship with Miss Bennet is strictly professional. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're willing to risk everything, our engagement, your company's reputation, your political future, for a woman who cleans your office. You're out of line. I'm being realistic. She's using you, Damien. Can't you see that? The tragic single mother act, the convenient medical emergency with your mother, playing on your savior complex. That's enough. It's not enough. If you don't end this obsession, I will. I've already started making calls about her custody situation, her employment history, her suitability as a mother. The words hit me like physical blows. Victoria wasn't just threatening me anymore, she was actively working to destroy my life. And she was using Richard Gray's connections to do it. What calls? Damien's voice was ice. The kind that ensure she's no longer your problem. Or mine. I'd heard enough. More than enough. I tried to back away quietly, but my elbow caught the edge of a catering cart, sending a stack of plates crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the corridor like gunshots. What was that? Victoria's voice was sharp with alarm. I ran. Not walked quickly or slipped away discreetly, I ran through the service corridors like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. If Victoria had Richard Gray making calls about my custody case, if they were building some kind of scandal around Damien's relationship with me. I burst through the exit door into the parking garage, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. Rain was pounding against the concrete, and I realized I'd left my purse and car keys upstairs in my rush to escape. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I was standing there trying to figure out my next move when footsteps echoed behind me. Alyssa. I turned to find Damien silhouetted in the doorway, his bow tie undone and his expression unreadable. I can explain, I started, but he cut me off. How much did you hear? Enough. The word came out smaller than I'd intended. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You have nothing to apologize for. He stepped closer, and I could see something dangerous burning in his eyes. Victoria was completely out of line. She wasn't wrong, though, was she? You have been helping me. The lawyer's card, the grocery store gift certificate? Yes. The simple admission hung between us like a confession. Why? For a moment, he didn't answer. Just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, rain echoing through the garage like white noise. Because you shouldn't have to fight alone, he said finally. The words broke something open in my chest. After months of struggling, of pretending I was strong enough to handle everything on my own, having someone, especially him, acknowledge how hard it had been was almost too much. I can't accept your help, I whispered. You heard what Victoria said. The scandal, the optics. I can't let my problems destroy your life. My life is my own concern. Not when your fiancé is making calls about my custody case. Not when board members are involved. I won't let Jamie pay for this. Something shifted in his expression. Victoria was lying about the calls. I made sure of that. What do you mean? But before he could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. And another. With shaking hands, I pulled it out of my pocket to find a series of messages from David Stewart, each one more threatening than the last. Emergency custody hearing moved to Monday. New evidence has come to light regarding your employment situation. Photographs have surfaced of inappropriate workplace behavior. Recommend you prepare for full custody transfer to your ex-husband. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering against the concrete. Alyssa? Damien was beside me instantly, his hand on my arm. What is it? I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd fought to protect, was falling apart. Victoria hadn't been making empty threats, she'd followed through. And now Jamie. The parking garage tilted sideways, and the last thing I remembered was Damien catching me as the world went dark. When I woke up 12 hours later in his penthouse bedroom, everything had changed. And I was about to discover that the night that destroyed my life had been the night Damien Harrison decided to save it, no matter what it cost him. The first week after being fired from Harrison & Company was like watching my life disintegrate in slow motion. Without the steady income, I couldn't make rent. Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, offered to watch Jamie for free, but I could see the worry in her elderly eyes every time she looked at the eviction notice taped to my door. "Mommy, why are we packing again?" Jamie asked, sitting cross-legged on our air mattress as I folded his clothes into garbage bags, the only luggage I could afford. "We're going on another adventure, remember?" But my smile felt like broken glass, and Jamie was getting too old to believe in adventures that involved sleeping in my car. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for Friday. David Stewart had made it clear that my employment instability and questionable associations were now central to Michael's case. The photographs Victoria had mentioned never materialized, probably because they didn't exist, but the damage was done. In the family court system, perception was reality. And the perception was that I was an unfit mother who'd been involved in some kind of inappropriate relationship with my billionaire boss. Margaret Wood, the family lawyer whose card I still carried, had agreed to represent me pro bono after a single phone call. She was brilliant, fierce, and honest about my chances. "Your ex-husband's team is painting a picture of instability," she'd explained during our brief consultation in her downtown office. "Multiple job changes, housing insecurity, and now this situation with Harrison & Company. We need to show the judge that you're capable of providing a stable environment." "How do I do that when I'm living in my car?" Her silence was answer enough. By Wednesday, I'd taken a job at an all-night diner in the worst part of the city. The pay was terrible, the customers were worse, and the manager had wandering hands that made my skin crawl. But it was work, and work was what I needed to show the judge. "Order up." Gary, the night cook, slammed another plate of congealed eggs onto the pass. He was 40-something, divorced, and had made it clear that my employment situation could become much more secure if I was willing to be friendly. I ignored him and carried the plate to table 6, where a trucker was reading a newspaper with Damien Harrison's face on the front page. Harrison & Co. stock plummets amid CEO's erratic behavior. I couldn't help myself, I glanced at the headline as I refilled his coffee. Sources close to Harrison & Company report that CEO Damien Harrison has been increasingly unstable following the departure of key personnel. Stock prices have dropped 15% in the past week as investors grow concerned about the tech mogul's ability to lead the company. "Guy's having a breakdown or something," the trucker commented, noticing my interest. "My brother works construction, says they canceled 3 major projects this week." Just, canceled. No explanation. I forced myself to look away. Damien Harrison's problems weren't my concern anymore. I had enough of my own. But as I cleaned tables until 4 a.m., trying to ignore Gary's increasingly bold comments about what might happen if the diner wasn't busy, I couldn't stop thinking about the hollowed look in Damien's eyes that morning he fired me. Like he was breaking himself apart to save me. Which was ridiculous, because men like Damien Harrison didn't break themselves for women like me. Thursday night brought rock bottom in the form of Jamie crying himself to sleep in the back seat of my car. "I want to go home," he whispered, clutching the small stuffed elephant that was the only toy he'd been able to keep. "I know, baby. Soon." But soon felt like a lie. The hearing was tomorrow, and I had nothing to show for myself except a job that barely covered gas money and an address that was technically a parking spot behind a 24-hour laundromat. My phone buzzed with another text from David Stewart. "Judge Morrison is known for his conservative stance on family stability. Dress appropriately and prepare for difficult questions about your recent choices." I stared at the message until the words blurred together, then turned off my phone and tried not to think about what recent choices might mean in a courtroom. That's when I saw the black car. It had been following us for 2 days, always staying back, never getting close enough to identify, but always there. In the diner parking lot when I started my shift. Outside the laundromat where we'd been sleeping. Following us to the McDonald's where Jamie and I shared a $1 menu dinner. At first, I'd thought it was paranoia. Now I was sure it was surveillance. Michael's team, probably. Or maybe Victoria, making sure I stayed down. Either way, the message was clear: I was being watched, judged, documented. Every mistake would be evidence. Every moment of weakness would be ammunition. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Margaret Wood's number. Maybe there was something else we could do. Some legal maneuver that could buy us more time. But as I stared at her name on the screen, I realized I was kidding myself. You can't win a legal battle when the other side has unlimited resources and you're living in your car. I was about to lose my son. The thought hit me like a physical blow, and I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. Jamie was already asleep, and he didn't need to see his mother completely falling apart. Not yet. But as I sat there in the dark parking lot, watching my breath fog up the windows while my 7-year-old slept in the back seat surrounded by garbage bags full of everything we owned, I finally understood what true powerlessness felt like. I'd lost everything trying to protect him, and I was going to lose him anyway. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in his glass tower, Damian Harrison was discovering that some victories felt exactly like defeat. He'd protected Alyssa from Victoria's immediate threats by firing her, removing her from the office politics and corporate warfare that could have destroyed her reputation permanently. He'd ensured that Richard Gray's calls about her custody case never happened by making it very clear that anyone interfering with Alyssa Bennett's life would find themselves facing legal and financial consequences that would last generations. He'd even had his legal team quietly monitor her custody case, ready to step in if Michael's lawyers tried anything too egregious. But watching her leave Harrison and company with her dignity in tatters, knowing she thought he'd betrayed her when he'd actually been trying to save her, that was eating him alive. "Sir?" Patricia stood in his office doorway, holding a stack of papers that probably needed his attention. The board meeting? He'd missed another board meeting. The third one this week. Cancel it. "Sir, they're getting concerned about?" "Cancel it, Patricia." She nodded and quietly withdrew, but not before he caught the worried look she gave him. The same look everyone at Harrison and Company had been giving him since Alyssa left. Like they were watching him self-destruct in real time. Which maybe they were. He couldn't concentrate on quarterly reports when he was wondering if she had enough money for groceries. Couldn't focus on merger negotiations when he was thinking about that custody hearing and whether his protection had been enough. Couldn't pretend to care about stock prices when the woman who'd saved his mother's life was probably sleeping in her car because he'd fired her to save her from a scandal that might not have even materialized. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Dinner tonight? We need to discuss the engagement announcement." He deleted it without responding. There wasn't going to be an engagement announcement. There wasn't going to be an engagement, period. That had ended the moment Victoria threatened to destroy an innocent woman's life out of jealousy and spite. But ending things with Victoria didn't solve the larger problem. He'd fallen for a woman he couldn't have, couldn't protect, and couldn't stop thinking about. A woman who probably hated him now. As he stood at his office window, looking out at the city lights and knowing that somewhere down there, Alyssa was fighting battles he'd made worse by trying to help, Damian Harrison realized that all the money in the world couldn't fix what he'd broken. And tomorrow, when that custody hearing decided Jamie's future, there would be nothing he could do but watch from the sidelines as the woman he'd failed faced the consequences of his protection. Some victories, he was learning, were just another way to lose everything that mattered. The darkness outside his window felt absolute. And 30 miles away, in a car that was becoming smaller and colder by the hour, Alyssa Bennett was about to discover that sometimes the only way forward is to let everything fall apart first. The family courthouse was exactly as soul-crushing as I'd expected. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look sickly. Hard plastic chairs that squeaked every time you moved. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with desperation and broken dreams. I sat in the hallway at 8:45 a.m., wearing the only professional outfit I owned, a navy dress I'd bought for job interviews 2 years ago, now slightly too loose because I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. Margaret Wood sat beside me, reviewing her notes one final time. "Remember," she said quietly, "answer directly, don't volunteer information, and stay calm no matter what they throw at you." Across the hall, Michael sat with his legal team like he was holding court. David Stewart was there, of course, along with 2 other attorneys I didn't recognize. Michael himself looked exactly the same as the day our divorce was finalized, expensive suit, perfect haircut, that confident smile that had once made me feel safe and now made my skin crawl. He caught me looking and gave me a small wave, like we were old friends meeting for coffee instead of former spouses fighting over our son's future. "Mommy?" I looked down to find Jamie sitting between me and Margaret, swinging his legs nervously. He was wearing his best clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt that Mrs. Patterson had ironed for him, and trying so hard to be brave that my heart physically ached. "Yes, baby? Are we going to be okay?" The question hit me like a freight train, because I honestly didn't know. But looking into his trusting brown eyes, I found something I'd been missing for weeks. Certainty. Not about winning, I still wasn't sure we could win. but certainty about who I was and what I was fighting for. "Yes," I said, taking his small hand in mine. "Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. Because we're a team, remember?" "Team Bennett," he whispered, squeezing my fingers. "Team Bennett," I confirmed, and for the first time in weeks, I meant it. The hearing itself started as badly as I'd feared. Judge Morrison was exactly as conservative and intimidating as advertised, a silver-haired man in his 60s who looked like he'd never met a single mother he thought was fit to raise children. David Stewart painted a picture of instability and poor judgment that made me sound like I was barely functional. "Your Honor, in the past 6 months alone, Mrs. Bennett has held 4 different jobs, been evicted from 2 apartments, and was recently terminated from Harrison and Company under circumstances that raise serious questions about her judgment and priorities." "What circumstances?" Judge Morrison asked, pen poised over his notes. "My client has reason to believe that Mrs. Bennett was engaged in an inappropriate relationship with her employer, Damian Harrison, which led to her termination." Margaret objected immediately. "Your Honor, there's no evidence to support." "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison said, giving me a look that suggested he'd already made up his mind. "Mr. Stewart, continue." "Furthermore, Mrs. Bennett is currently unemployed and homeless, living in her vehicle with the child. In contrast, Mr. Bennett can provide a stable home, excellent schools, and a structured environment with his new wife, who happens to be a child psychologist." Of course Michael had remarried. Of course his new wife was perfect on paper. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to stay calm and answer honestly. But every question felt like a trap, every response like evidence of my inadequacy. "Mrs. Bennett, can you explain the nature of your relationship with Mr. Harrison?" "I was an employee. I cleaned offices." "Just cleaned offices?" "Yes." "Then why did he personally involve himself in your financial and legal affairs?" I stared at Judge Morrison, trying to find words that wouldn't damn me further. "Because how do you explain that a billionaire noticed you without it sounding inappropriate? How do you describe kindness without it looking like something else?" "I saved his mother's life," I said finally. "He was grateful." "Grateful enough to provide you with expensive legal referrals and financial assistance?" "I never asked for anything." "But you accepted it." "Yes." The simple answer hung in the air like a confession of guilt. The hearing continued for another hour, each question chipping away at what little credibility I had left. Michael testified about his stable income, his loving marriage, his ability to provide Jamie with opportunities and security. His new wife, Dr. Sarah Manning, spoke eloquently about child development and the importance of consistent, structured environments. By the time we broke for lunch, I knew I was losing. "It's not over," Margaret said as we sat in her car outside a fast food restaurant, picking at sandwiches neither of us could taste. "The afternoon session will be better. We'll focus on your bond with Jamie, your dedication to his well-being." "Margaret." I set down my untouched sandwich and looked at her. "Be honest. What are my chances?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Not good. Morrison's old school, and Michael's team has done a good job painting you as unstable. Unless something dramatic changes." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I was going to lose my son. The realization should have destroyed me. Should have left me sobbing in the parking lot of a Subway restaurant while my lawyer tried to figure out how to salvage the unsalvageable. Instead, something strange happened. I got angry. Not the helpless, desperate anger I'd been carrying for months. This was something cleaner. Sharper. Focused. Michael had systematically destroyed our finances, our credit, and our future. Then he'd used my resulting struggles as evidence that I was unfit to raise the child I'd sacrificed everything to protect. And now he was sitting in that courtroom with his perfect new family, acting like he was rescuing Jamie from me instead of acknowledging that he was the reason we were in this position in the first place. "I want to change my testimony," I said suddenly. Margaret looked up from her notes. "What?" "I've been answering their questions like I'm ashamed of everything that's happened. Like I need to apologize for being a single mother who's had to fight for survival. I'm done with that." "Alyssa." "No." I turned to face her fully. "Jamie doesn't need a mother who apologizes for loving him enough to take night jobs and clean offices and sleep in cars if that's what it takes to keep him safe. He needs a mother who's proud of how hard she's fought for him." Margaret studied my face for a moment, then smiled. "Now that's a closing argument I can work with." We walked back into the courthouse at 1:30 p.m., and everything was different. Not the building, it was still fluorescent and depressing. Not Judge Morrison, he was still intimidating and skeptical. Not Michael's smug confidence or his legal team's expensive suits. But me. I was different. When Judge Morrison called me back to the stand for additional questioning, I sat up straighter and looked him directly in the eye. Mrs. Bennet, do you believe you've made good choices regarding your son's welfare over the past year? Yes, Your Honor. I believe I've made the best choices available to me. Even though those choices have led to housing instability and financial hardship? Your Honor, those choices were necessary because my ex-husband deliberately destroyed our financial security during our divorce. I've worked multiple jobs, accepted help when it was offered, and done everything in my power to keep my son safe and loved. If that's somehow shameful, then I'm not sure what kind of mother you think I should be. Something shifted in Judge Morrison's expression. A flicker of interest, maybe even respect. You don't feel your recent employment termination reflects poor judgment? I feel it reflects the reality that sometimes good people get caught up in situations beyond their control. I saved a woman's life, and I worked harder than anyone in that building. If someone chose to twist that into something inappropriate, that says more about them than it does about me. The questions continued, but the tone was different now. Less accusatory. More like a judge actually trying to understand rather than just building a case. When Margaret gave her closing argument, she painted a picture of a mother who'd fought impossible odds with grace and determination. A woman who'd lost everything but never stopped putting her child first. A parent who deserved admiration, not judgment. Your Honor, she concluded, poverty doesn't make someone a bad parent. Struggle doesn't disqualify someone from loving their child. And if we're going to punish women for the circumstances created by vindictive ex-husbands, then we're not protecting children, we're punishing the very people who sacrifice the most for them. When court adjourned at 4 p.m., Judge Morrison said he'd review all testimony and evidence before making his decision. You'll have my ruling by Monday, he told both legal teams. As we walked out of the courthouse, Margaret squeezed my arm. That was much better. You should be proud. I was proud. For the first time in months, I was proud of how I'd handled myself under pressure. But as I drove toward Mrs. Patterson's apartment to pick up Jamie, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Miss Bennet? This is Patricia Kingsley from Harrison & Company. My heart stopped. Patricia? I'm calling because there are some things you need to know about what really happened that night. About why Mr. Harrison did what he did. I pulled over to the side of the road, hands shaking. What things? Can you meet me tonight? There's something Mr. Harrison doesn't know I kept. Something that changes everything. As I sat there in my car, watching the sun set over a city that had taken everything from me and given it back in the most unexpected ways, I realized that sometimes the truth has perfect timing. And sometimes the people you think have abandoned you have actually been fighting for you all along. Where? I asked. Patricia Kingsley was waiting for me at an all-night diner on the other side of town, the kind of place where conversations happened in shadows and nobody asked questions about who you were or why you needed to meet at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. She looked different outside the corporate environment of Harrison & Company. Smaller, somehow. More human. But her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made her Damien Harrison's most trusted assistant for 15 years. Thank you for coming, she said as I slid into the booth across from her. I wasn't sure you would. You said it was about that night. About why he fired me. Patricia nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet. Before I show you this, I need you to understand something about Damien Harrison. He's a good man who spent his entire adult life believing he doesn't deserve to be happy. And when he found someone who made him question that belief, well, he panicked. She turned the tablet toward me, and I found myself looking at security footage from the Harrison & Company building. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. on the night of the gala. This is what really happened, Patricia said softly. On the screen, I watched myself stumbling through the service corridor, clearly in distress. I remembered that part, overhearing Victoria's threats, the panic, running from their argument like my life depended on it. But what I saw next took my breath away. Damien appeared in the frame seconds after I'd left, moving with urgent purpose. He wasn't following me, he was chasing someone else. The video shifted to another camera angle, and I saw Victoria and Richard Gray in heated conversation near the elevator bank. Patricia touched the screen, bringing up the audio. Deal with her permanently, Victoria was saying. Richard has contacts in family services. A few strategic calls about neglect, drug use, whatever it takes. Victoria, this is going too far. Richard's voice was uncomfortable but not disapproving enough. Is it? She's become a liability, Richard. Damien's losing focus, the board is asking questions, and I won't let some desperate single mother destroy everything we've built. The video jumped to another timestamp, 12:15 a.m. I watched myself collapse in the parking garage, apparently from the combination of stress, exhaustion, and not having eaten anything substantial in days. And I watched Damien catch me as I fell. He carried you to his car, Patricia explained quietly. Drove you to his penthouse because it was the closest safe place. He was going to take you to a hospital, but you were coherent enough to refuse medical attention. Said you couldn't afford it. The next camera angle showed Damien's private elevator. He was supporting most of my weight as we rode up to his penthouse, and even unconscious, I could see how carefully he was holding me. He sat with you all night, Patricia continued. Made sure you were breathing okay, that you weren't in any medical distress. Didn't sleep at all. Then why did he fire me? The words came out broken, confused. Patricia smiled sadly. Because 3 hours after you fell asleep, Richard Gray called him. She swiped to a different file on the tablet. This one was an audio recording. Damien's office phone calls are automatically recorded for legal purposes, she explained. Richard forgot that when he made his threats. Richard Gray's voice filled the small diner booth, cold and calculating. I hope you understand the position you've put us all in, Damien. Having that woman found in your penthouse, the optics are catastrophic. She collapsed from exhaustion, Richard. I helped her. That's all. Is it? Because Victoria has some very interesting theories about your relationship with Miss Bennet. And if those theories become public knowledge, what are you saying? I'm saying that I have contacts in family services, in the courts, in the media. If Miss Bennet continues to be a problem, if she continues to distract you from your responsibilities, those contacts might hear some very disturbing stories about her fitness as a mother. Drug use. Neglect. Men coming and going from her apartment. Richard. All completely fabricated, of course. But by the time she proves her innocence, her son will be living with his father, and you'll have learned a valuable lesson about keeping your charity cases at arm's length. The recording continued for several more minutes, Richard making it crystal clear that as long as I worked at Harrison & Company, as long as I was anywhere in Damien's orbit, my son would be in danger from people with the power to destroy lives for sport. When it ended, I sat in stunned silence. He fired you to protect you, Patricia said gently. Cut all ties so Richard couldn't use your connection to Harrison & Company against you in court. But that wasn't enough for him. What do you mean? Patricia swiped to another screen, financial records that made my head spin. He's been paying for Margaret Wood's representation. Anonymously, through a shell company. That pro bono work? It's actually being funded by Damien, but Margaret can't know because it would compromise your case. My hands were shaking. What? There's more. He had Richard Gray investigated by the FBI for corruption and bribery. Turns out a board member using his position to threaten innocent people violates about 15 federal laws. Richard was arrested yesterday afternoon. The diner seemed to tilt sideways. Yesterday? The same day as your custody hearing. Which means any calls he might have made to influence the proceedings would be inadmissible, and likely to get Michael's case thrown out entirely for judicial interference. I stared at the tablet, trying to process everything I was learning. The night that had seemed like a betrayal had actually been a rescue. The man who'd fired me had spent the last month systematically destroying anyone who threatened me or my son. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Patricia's expression softened. Because he's miserable without you. Because I've watched him torture himself for weeks, thinking he saved you by pushing you away. And because? She hesitated, then pulled up one more file. Because this came through his email yesterday. It was a resignation letter. Damien's resignation as CEO of Harrison & Company. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my position to pursue other interests. The board of directors should consider this decision final and non-negotiable. I have no desire to lead a company that would threaten innocent people to maintain the status quo. He's giving up everything, Patricia said quietly. His company, his fortune, his entire life's work. Because he can't stomach being part of a system that would hurt you to control him. The weight of that sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. Damien Harrison, billionaire, genius, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, was walking away from it all because he couldn't protect me and keep his position at the same time. Where is he now? I managed to ask. His penthouse. Has been for 3 days. Won't take calls, won't see anyone. I think. Patricia's voice got soft. I think he's planning to disappear. Start over somewhere else where his name doesn't carry the kind of power that makes him a target for people like Victoria and Richard. I was already standing up, my mind racing. I have to. Alyssa. Patricia caught my arm. He thinks you hate him. He thinks firing you was the right thing to do, but that it cost him any chance of whatever you two might have been to each other. Then I need to show him he's wrong. As I drove across the city toward the Harrison & Company tower, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Wood. Emergency call from the court. Judge Morrison wants to see all parties Monday at 9 a.m. Something about new evidence regarding judicial interference. This could be very good news. I smiled through tears I didn't realize I'd been shedding. Richard Gray's arrest meant the threats against Jamie were over. Michael's case was probably about to implode. And the man I'd blamed for destroying my life had actually been saving it from the shadows. But none of that would matter if I couldn't convince Damien Harrison that some sacrifices were too big to make. The Harrison and Company building was mostly empty at 10 p.m., but Patricia had given me the security codes to reach the executive floor. As the elevator climbed toward the penthouse, I tried to figure out what I was going to say to the man who'd given up everything to protect me. How do you thank someone for that kind of sacrifice? How do you tell them it wasn't necessary? How do you explain that losing them hurt more than losing everything else combined? The elevator doors opened directly into Damien's penthouse, the same space where I'd woken up confused and terrified just weeks ago. But now I understood what I'd been too panicked to see then. This wasn't the lair of a man who'd taken advantage of an unconscious woman. This was the sanctuary of someone who'd spent the night making sure she was safe. Damien was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against the city lights, and he looked like he'd aged years in the weeks since I'd seen him. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and when he turned at the sound of the elevator, his eyes were hollow with exhaustion and something that looked like grief. Alyssa. My name came out like a prayer and a curse combined. How did you? Patricia told me everything. He closed his eyes like I'd struck him. Patricia had no right. She had every right, I said, stepping into the room that had once represented my downfall and now felt like the place where everything might finally make sense. Someone needed to tell me the truth. The truth? His laugh was bitter. The truth is that I destroyed your life trying to save it. The truth is that every time I tried to help, I made things worse. The truth is that you're better off with me out of the picture entirely. Is that what you think? It's what I know. I moved closer, close enough to see the pain etched in every line of his face. Damien Harrison, I said softly, you are the most idiotic brilliant man I have ever met. He blinked at me in surprise. Did it ever occur to you to ask what I wanted? To include me in the decision about whether protecting me was worth destroying yourself. You were in danger. I've been in danger my entire life, I interrupted. Dangers you didn't create and couldn't control. But do you know what the worst part of these past few weeks has been? It wasn't losing my job, or sleeping in my car, or facing that custody hearing. He was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. It was thinking that the one person who'd made me feel like I mattered had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. You matter, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. God, Alyssa, you matter so much that I was willing to give up everything I've ever built just to keep you safe. Then don't give it up for me, I said, stepping close enough that I could reach out and touch him if I was brave enough. Fight for me instead. Something shifted in his expression, hope warring with disbelief. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. I took a shaky breath. I'm offering to stand beside you while you rebuild Harrison and Company into something better. I'm offering to help you fire every board member who thinks threatening innocent people is acceptable business practice. I'm offering to be your partner in creating the kind of company your mother would be proud of. Alyssa. I'm offering to love you, I said simply. If you'll let me. For a moment, the only sound in the penthouse was the hum of the city below us. Then Damien crossed the remaining distance between us in 2 steps and pulled me into his arms like I was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. I love you too, he whispered against my hair. I've been in love with you since the moment you saved my mother's life and then disappeared like you hadn't just done something extraordinary. When he kissed me, it tasted like coming home after a very long journey. And when we finally broke apart, both of us were crying. What happens now? I asked. Now, Damien said, smiling for the first time in weeks, we figure out how to build the life we both deserve. Together. Outside the penthouse windows, the city sparkled with possibility. And for the first time since my divorce, I believed in happy endings again. 6 months later. Mommy, is Damien really going to be my new daddy? I looked up from the morning newspaper to find Jamie sitting at our kitchen table, not a fold-out table in a studio apartment, but an actual kitchen table in an actual kitchen with windows that let in actual sunlight. He was working on his math homework with the kind of focused concentration that made my heart swell with pride. What do you think about that? I asked, setting down the business section where Harrison and Company's stock price had just hit an all-time high. I think it's awesome, Jamie said matter-of-factly. He taught me how to code, and he always remembers to cut the crusts off my sandwiches. Plus, he makes you smile like you used to before Daddy left. Out of the mouths of babes. The custody hearing had ended exactly as Margaret predicted once Richard Gray's arrest came to light. Judge Morrison had been furious about the attempted judicial interference. Michael's case had crumbled under scrutiny, and I'd been awarded full custody with Michael getting supervised visitation only. Michael had been so angry about losing control that he'd actually tried to sue Damien for alienation of affection. That lawsuit had lasted exactly 1 day before Michael's own lawyers dropped him as a client. Apparently, suing a billionaire who'd been protecting your ex-wife from corruption and threats wasn't the brilliant legal strategy Michael thought it was. "Good morning, beautiful." I turned to find Damien in the doorway, looking devastating in jeans and a button-down shirt. Even after 6 months, seeing him in my kitchen, our kitchen, still made my heart skip beats. "Good morning yourself," I said as he dropped a kiss on the top of my head and ruffled Jamie's hair. "Morning, buddy. How's the homework coming?" "Good. I finished the multiplication problems you showed me yesterday." Damien had turned out to be unexpectedly gifted with children. Patient where I was frazzled, creative where I was practical, and absolutely devoted to making sure Jamie felt secure and loved in our new life together. Our new life together. Even thinking it still felt surreal sometimes. After that night in his penthouse, everything had changed with stunning speed. Damien hadn't resigned from Harrison and Company. Instead, he'd fired half the board of directors and instituted new policies that made the company a model for ethical business practices. Victoria Ashford had disappeared from our lives entirely after her engagement to Damien was mutually ended, and she'd decided that life in Europe suited her better. I'd gone back to school to finish my MBA, which turned out to be easier when you weren't juggling 3 part-time jobs and living in your car. Damien had offered to pay for everything, but I'd insisted on taking out student loans like a normal person. Some independence was worth preserving, even in love. Though I had accepted his offer to work part-time as a consultant for Harrison and Company's new charitable foundation. Turns out that understanding poverty from the inside made me pretty good at designing programs that actually help people instead of just making donors feel good about themselves. "So," Damien said, pouring himself coffee and stealing a piece of toast from my plate, "I have something to ask you too." Jamie looked up from his homework with interest. I felt my pulse quicken with hope and nervousness combined. "What's that?" I managed to ask casually. Instead of answering, Damien pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and set it on the table between us. Jamie's eyes went wide. "Is that?" "A ring," Damien confirmed, but he was looking at me. "If your mom says yes." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. We'd talked about the future in general terms, about moving in together permanently, about combining our families, about building something that would last. But seeing the ring made it real in a way that stole all the air from my lungs. "You want to marry us?" Jamie asked excitedly. "I want to marry your mom," Damien said with a smile. "But I was hoping you'd be okay with having me as a stepdad." "Are you kidding? That would be the best thing ever." Damien laughed, then turned back to me with an expression that was nervous and hopeful and absolutely certain all at the same time. "Alyssa Bennett," he said softly, "6 months ago, you saved my life by showing me what real love looks like. You taught me that protecting someone doesn't mean pushing them away, it means standing beside them and fighting for the life you want to build together." He opened the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful and elegant and perfect, not too big, not too flashy, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. "I love you. I love Jamie. I love the family we've become. Will you marry me?" The word yes was already on my lips when Jamie interrupted. "Mom, if you don't say yes, I'm going to be really disappointed in you." I burst out laughing, which turned into crying, which turned into launching myself across the kitchen to kiss the man who'd proven that sometimes fairy tales happen to ordinary people who've been through extraordinary struggles. "Yes," I whispered against his lips. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring fit perfectly, because of course it did. Damien Harrison didn't do anything halfway. As he slipped it onto my finger, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The divorce that had destroyed my old life. The job that had seemed like a lifeline but had felt like a trap. The night I'd woken up in his bedroom thinking my world was ending when it was actually beginning. All the pain, all the struggle, all the moments when I'd been sure I couldn't keep fighting, they had led to this kitchen, this morning, this man, this family. "So when's the wedding?" Jamie asked practically. "Whenever your mom wants it," Damien said, his arm around my waist like he never intended to let me go again. "Soon," I said, looking around at our kitchen, our life, our future. Definitely soon. Because I'd spent too many years believing I didn't deserve happiness to waste any more time being careful with the love that had found me despite every reason it shouldn't have worked. 6 months ago, I'd been a divorced single mom living in her car, cleaning offices for a man who seemed as unreachable as the moon. Today, I was planning a wedding to my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life. Sometimes the most beautiful endings start with what feels like the worst possible beginning. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to keep fighting for what matters, the universe surprises you with exactly what you need. I love you, I whispered to Damien as Jamie went back to his homework, already planning what he wanted to wear to our wedding. I love you too, he whispered back. Always. Outside our kitchen window, the morning sun was bright with promise. And I couldn't wait to see what came next. If this story touched your heart, please let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment when everything seemed hopeless but turned out to be leading to something beautiful? I love hearing your stories, and they inspire the content I create for you. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I share new stories like this every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Your support means everything to me, and knowing that these stories resonate with you makes every word worth writing. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories start in the most ordinary places. Keep believing in your own happy ending, it might be closer than you think.